Yo, what up? It's Redzone In the Lab podcast. I'm Deuce. Today we got a packed show. We got Craig Hoffman going to be joining us today from the Hoffman Show, Team 980 and the Take Command podcast. Can't wait to chop it up with him about the Commanders this offseason and what it is that, what does a 3-year plan look like? Before we get into the show, I do want to if we don't make any trades to get back in the first, like I think we should make a trade to get back in the first for a premier player, preferably between 18 to 26. Somewhere in there, someone is there that's high up on their board, they really like, that's their guy. I wouldn't mind at all getting back into the first round. Rather, it's a edge, a corner, and obviously an offensive tackle. I wouldn't mind going back for any of those positions. But at the top, if we don't make any trades, pick 36 and pick 40. To me, I want one of them to be a tackle. I do. But at the same time, we have so many holes, and the best player that possibly could be available there, I think we should take a chance on it. I think we should take a chance on it. And one of the people that I really love, and I'm kind of having this conversation because of TJ Tampa, but if he's there at a premier position, he's there, and he may be the next tackle, maybe Blake Fisher, with someone I think you can find a little later in the third round, someone like that could play right tackle. But I think that's where, it's going to really be it's going to really be a decision that they're going to have to make. Is are they going to reach for a tackle that they could possibly get in the third round, or are they going to take best player available with the 36th or the 40th pick? And you have a young quarterback, which I think they're going to do, but who knows with the second pick. So you want to have an offensive tackle there, but I just don't know what they're going to do. I've been absolutely wrong about every move that they've made this offseason, which is great. But to that point, I wouldn't mind trading back into the first for a premier player, and I wouldn't mind going BPA with pick 36 or pick 40. But yes, that's definitely something to consider. But on the other side of this, we have Craig Hoffman.
Shout out Redzone In the Lab podcast.
Hey, what up, y'all? It's Benjamin St. Jude, DB for the Washington Commanders. I want to give a big shout out to Redzone In the Lab podcast.
Welcome back. It's Redzone In the Lab podcast. I am Deuce, and joining me today is Craig Hoffman, a friend. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm good, Deuce. How are you, bro?
I'm doing good, man. Hey, you think I'm about to change that intro? You think them guys gonna have prominent roles this year?
I think there's going to be. I don't think you're going to bat 1,000. I'm going to put it that way. I'm on record as saying I don't know that Cole Turner makes a roster. I think BSJ will be there. I don't know about a prominent role, but I think yeah. I think a good training camp worth a new clip collection might be in your future.
Yeah, definitely got to get Craig on there on my collections. All right, Commanders, right? How does it feel to talk about football?
It's good, and also I will say I was talking to my producer Anthony the other day, and we're kind of looking at the next couple of months, and I was like, "What got us through this time last year, man? It feels so stale." And you're like, "Oh yeah, there was that whole sale thing," and so I much prefer talking about the football. Although, as someone who has to, like, sometimes I get comments on YouTube that are so funny, and it's like, "Oh, y'all really beat a dead horse," or like, "Y'all talking about this still?" And I'm like, what else do you want us to talk about?
Exactly.
Like, this is my show is 4 to 7, especially when the basketball ends. Like, we don't get to, we get 15 minutes off here and there because of a pregame show cutting us off early. I'm about to be 4 to 7 every single day, and the hours do not fill themselves. So from a variety of topic standpoint, sure, I miss the sale. From like a peace of mind standpoint, this is great. I will take this 10 out of 10.
Most definitely. New way of business. The Commanders obviously operate different than what the team has been operating over the last 30 years. What is some of the biggest differences that you've noticed for the Hog ownership group since they've come in?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is they're building floor up instead of top down. I think that everything was about star chasing. Everything was about, can you get the big name, spend the dollar, and that goes back to like the first, the Deion Sanders type of signings back in the day to like, Landon Collins a couple years ago, like until they kind of shut down the spending the last couple of years, just because the team was, in the process of being sold and Dan didn't have any money and all those things, or no cash, like all those things. It was always about like, can you get the one big thing that fixes all your problems? And now it's like, let's spread the wealth. Let's put a floor underneath us. Let's get quality people and players across the roster. And then that's when the quote unquote build through the draft comes in, where you're trying to get your stars in the draft. And obviously they've got to hit on those players, but they've done a good job of making it so that the best player available theory can actually be happened upon and acted upon, because they don't have any, outside of a couple that I'm sure we'll talk about, a couple of any real major needs at any position, because they've done smart stuff to kind of make it so they can go into opening day with the team as constructed now, and then hopefully build high-end stuff on top of that over the next couple of years.
And what we don't hear a lot about really is the business side. The past couple of years when Jason Wright has been so available to the fans and on Twitter, and I used to tell like this is not normal. Like other fan bases don't know the head of business, like the business side like this. This is just not normal. And since they've been here, he hasn't had that presence. Like, oh, he's gonna get fired. No, this is normal. This is normal stuff. So what about the business side of it? Anything that you heard or noticed about the differences between now and then?
Yeah, I mean, number one is there's actual investment from ownership. Like Jason, I'm sure, had a bunch of ideas and things he wanted to do. Instead, his job was to put out fires, which, by the way, was why he was hired, right?
Yeah,
For those
exactly.
that don't know, Jason Wright's background was to working at McKinsey, the big consulting firm in DC. He was like in crisis management, and basically the NFL and the Snyders hired McKinsey, and Jason was their person because of his NFL background. And Dan was like, well, you want to just do this for us in house? And, Jason was like, sure. And he stayed, and he's like, when else am I going to get that opportunity to do this? But like, he's a smart enough guy and has done some good things. And, they were ready to roll with the stuff in training camp last year. And now it's like, okay, let's see what you can actually do. Let's see, can you use some of the stuff where you used to, in your job at McKinsey, be do some lobbying in DC, and you have relationships on the Hill? Can you use those to unlock RFK on the stadium side, which is his single biggest project right now, without question? And then the upgrades to the stadiums, like you have the investment both in from top ideas, like whatever Jason wants to do, but also like I'd assume Jason's staff is twice, 3 times the size of what it used to be. Like you can just have people doing stuff, and that's not the case previously. And I think the thing that's most impressive to me, Deuce, is I think it'd be pretty easy to be like, hey, sorry, we know FedEx is a dump. We're going to clean up some stuff that, make sure there's no like leaky pipes, but we're trying to build a new stadium as fast as we can, live with it while it is. They're like, no, we're going to make this the best possible stadium we can right now, and then maybe knock it down and build a new one, or go somewhere else and build a new one and figure out what we're going to do with all that stuff. So I think it's pretty impressive that they're putting, 40, 50, $60 million at a time. It'll be hundreds of millions of dollars of investment into FedEx, and the fan experience of, can we get you in and out faster? All that kind of stuff, which I don't know. I'd actually ask you, like, as someone who I assume you go to a bunch of games as a fan, right? Like, how was the getting in and out of the stadium last year? Because like the only time I was at FedEx Field, like with the masses last year because of the pregame show, was the Beyonce concert. Like my wife and I went and saw Beyonce before the season, and it was terrible,
right? Yeah,
terrible getting in and out. The show was amazing. And actually getting out wasn't too bad because we got stuck parking in someone's like driveway out, outside the stadium, and just walked in. But getting in and out of the stadium, statistically, they said they've cut like almost 30 minutes to an hour, I think, by the end of the year. So I would ask you, like, what was your experience getting in and out? Because that's some of the stuff that they've been working on.
Yeah. So out of conference games, out of division games, right? It's fairly easy. No problems getting in, really no problems getting out, because there really wasn't a lot of fans there. You know, to be on, even with the sellouts. When it's a division rivalry, or someone within a division, Giants, Cowboys, Eagles, you got to get there extremely earlier. Now, this is when you're not in the red zone lap, right? And I'm kind of talking about last year more so than this year, because this past year I was red zone lot. Red zone lot is awesome. You're right there by the stadium. Red zone lot, you get in, you walk right in the stadium. When you leave, you go out red zone lot straight out. There's no issues at all in the red zone lot. But everywhere else from last year, it's very difficult when it's a division game, or if it's a popular team that's coming, it's very difficult. It takes a long time. You got to get there super early. Traffic is all over the place.
Yeah. So I know that's not like that, but that kind of thing is, hopefully it's better than it was. That's what they're working on. And so like those are the kinds of things that I think you can judge that business side on, is like, just how do you feel as a fan outside of the football? Like, they can't control what happens between the white lines when the whistle blows, but is the overall experience, from food to getting in and out of the stadium to customer service to all that stuff, like, is it better? And if so, then Jason and his team are doing a good job. And if not, then they're not.
Yeah, and that's the thing with me. Like, we talk about this a lot. What percentage is the fan experience? Going to the stadium and going to games compared to like them actually winning or losing? I carry a lot of fan experience, right? Because I see a lot of people. We have fun. We tailgate. We have fun before and after the game. Wins are always better, but because they lose, it's not going to deter me from coming to the games or getting season ticket. Like, that's not going to deter me from doing that. Not to put a knock on those that do. Like, somebody want to see winning. Until you win, I'm not going to spend money. All right, cool. I can understand that. But for me, you can't get upset at me because I still want to go, because I carry a bigger percentage in fan experience than I do in the actual game.
Like, I would put it this way, right? Do you have a good time until the game starts? Right? Like, that's a kind of a barrier to entry. Because if you're not going to have a good time and it's going to be super frustrating, and then they might also get their butts kicked, like, no one's going to that. But if you at least know you're going to have a good time until they play crappy football, then at least you can kind of salvage that. And it's a constant like balancing act. But
most definitely,
it's a barrier, literally a barrier to entry. And if you can remove that and say like, hey, it's going to be a good time, and if they lose, like, that's football, okay. But if you're like, this is going to be miserable, getting in and out is going to suck, and if they win, like, yay, but I could have watched that easier on my couch, then they're not doing a good enough job.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Bob Myers, you're a basketball guy.
Yeah.
You know who Bob Myers is. When they hired him, because no one knew, it's just, here's Bob Myers.
Yeah.
Like, what was your thought process?
Well, the funniest thing about the no one knew was, like, I remember listening to Zach Lowe's pod, NBA, ESPN NBA analyst Zach Lowe later that week, and he's like, "Yeah, like everybody knew that." And I'm like, not in the circles, like, okay, maybe in your you work with the guy at ESPN, of course you knew. Thanks for telling us, buddy. Which is always the weird thing about, like, when ESPN or any other network folks wind up leaving for jobs or whatever, and they go from Doc Rivers going to the Bucks. It's like, well, he was calling the game yesterday, and now he's a head coach today. But I think I loved that. I think Bob is one of the most uniquely talented executives in sports of the last 2 decades. His ability to understand people is tremendous. And I think when you talk about building the right kind of locker room, it's much harder in football because it's 53 versus, well, I wouldn't even say it's harder. It's different in football, right? Because
more personality.
53, there's more personalities, but they also have most of them don't have that much of an impact. Like,
That's
one
true.
there, sorry for the coarseness of the phrase here, but like, one turd doesn't necessarily ruin the punch bowl. There's enough punch bowls between position groups and celebrating offense and defense, etc. Sorry, my brain is not fully operational at this point, so I couldn't think of a better analogy. But like, in basketball, you have one guy who messes up the locker room, and like, that whole locker room's trashed. And Bob was able to build a Warriors locker room that, despite at the end having its problems with Jordan Poole and Draymond, was harmonious despite some enormous personalities and despite the enormous fame that Steph Curry ultimately gathered based off of his play. And put the right coach in charge of that and Steve Kerr. And like, I think people forget how unpopular that was initially because Mark Jackson was very popular in that locker room, and Bob had the courage to move on from Mark and hire Steve Kerr and tell Steph, like, trust me, tell Draymond, trust me. And they did. And they obviously had a tremendous run of success. And so I think bringing that like understanding of people to the search process leads you to people like Adam Peters and to someone like Dan Quinn. And we've seen, I think, the benefits of that and why, Logan and I talk about a lot on Take Command, and I talk a lot about on my radio show why the personality piece is going to be so important with this second pick. And not that Myers is still like, I don't think he's going to be involved in selecting the quarterback, but you understand why they favor someone who can evaluate people, because it tells you what kind of people they'll surround themselves with, which is a huge definer ultimately of success in sports, in business, in life. You want to know if someone's successful, look at who they surround themselves with. And,
That's right.
Bob Myers is as good at evaluating that as anybody in the last, as I said, 2 decades of sports.
Speaking of evaluators, Adam Peters was arguably the hottest name on the market, and we end up getting and hiring him. That itself, what type of like impact is that, or what does that say about this last few decades of this team to be able to pull something like this off?
Everything. I mean, I think it speaks well to the fans as well. Like, fans deserve credit because they've shown that they will come back. Like, I think selling out those games early in the season last year, while this team still looked like it might be competitive, showed the league that like this place is still this place. Yeah, it's not going to be RFK in the 90s. But what's been interesting in talking to folks who were around back then, DC, longtime DC fans, is they'll tell you like, yeah, well, when the team wasn't good, like we love to hype up RFK and the stadium shaking when they're winning Super Bowls. But what they forget from those stories is when the team wasn't very good, RFK was just as empty as FedEx. And so DC has always been, and I don't mean this as a shot, it just is what it is. DC is an event town. There's a lot to do here. It's a huge geographic area that's not always the easiest to get around. And so if you make it worth people's while, and this goes back to what we were talking about on the business side, but also the football side, if you make it worth people's while, and it's a big deal, they will show up and they will show out. But until that happens, it's not going to be the same. And so, and that's why people will tell you like FedEx in 2012 was not quite RFK back in the day, but it was damn close when RG had it going. So I think that ultimately with Peters, seeing that enthusiasm still being in the fan base, and seeing how Josh is running things, and all of the things I think we're missing for a lot of the Snyder era, confidence from the fan base, all that kind of stuff. He goes, yeah, this is a place that we can do what we want, and a place that I can have an impact, because that's, on a personal level, that's the kind of thing you're looking for if you're leaving a place like San Francisco, is like, what kind of legacy am I looking at here? If this is going to be my job, am I going to have a fair shot to do it? And what's it ultimately going to mean? And the chance to be the person who rebuilds this franchise, you don't get that opportunity very often. And I think that was a huge draw for Adam Peters to be here.
With the coaches, Quinn, everyone that he's hired, there are a lot of experience, a lot of guys that have done each other's jobs, a lot of guys that had heavy voices in other organizations. And right now, it's the honeymoon period. I know we went through free agency, so there were probably some disagreements in there. I'm sure going to be disagreements during the draft, but for the most part, it should kind of be clean sailing. But if the losses start pile up, like what type of job is that for Peters or for Dan Quinn to make sure everyone understands their role in their lane?
Yeah, I mean, that's Dan's job. And certainly he could call Adam and be like, hey, can we meet with Coach X and Coach Y? Like, Adam's very good at that stuff. He's a great people person. And I think that wouldn't be the worst idea. But like, I don't know that Dan's ever going to need that, because that's who Dan is at his core, is like a people person who's really good at that kind of thing. And I think you're just trying to avoid like what happened with, Carolina last year. Like, that's the worst case scenario, is you get a bunch of really smart coaches in the room together. who have some different backgrounds, and you're like, this is going to be good. We're going to have different solutions. Like, people are bringing different ideas, and it never becomes a cohesive thing. And specifically on offense, defense, you're dealing with a lot less of this because of the familiarity of DQ, Joe Witt, some of the other coaches that they've brought in, and I think a more cohesive group of backgrounds. But offensively, you've got some guys that have spent a lot of time in the West Coast system. You've got some guys that have done some zone running, some gap scheme running, some air Coryell, some air raid. Like, there's everything in that room. And so the good news is it's like, okay, here's our problem this week. What are our solutions? And it's like, we could do that. We could do that. We could do that. And it's a matter of Cliff being able to be a leader and say, okay, I like that. I don't like that. Could we combo these things, and can we teach it to the players? And that's, we're having the play callers and the play calling experience of Brian Johnson and especially Anthony Lynn in the room is huge because they can go like, I don't know that we can get this across, or, let's make sure when we teach it, we emphasize this thing. And so if they work together like that, they can create something pretty special. Now, I don't know that they're going to have the personnel to make it sing this year, but schematically, like, they could create some pretty innovative stuff. If they don't, if they're not on the same page and they don't have the techniques and the all the things, the language, like everything's not straight, then it's going to be a disaster. And Logan's talked about some stops that he's had along the way where it was like that, where, he used to like know the OC, and the tight ends coach that he was with was newer, say to Kyle out in San Francisco, I think was maybe one of the examples. And he was like, that's not how Kyle teaches it. Like, he's in the tight ends meeting room and like that's not going to go well on the practice field. And it like he would step up and be like, hey, I'm pretty sure Kyle wants it this way, and they would get it fixed. Or, if it didn't happen, then it'd get on the practice field and you got to stop practice because Kyle's yelling at the tight ends coach or whatever, whatever the stop was. Maybe it was Bill O'Brien in Houston. That sounds right. Whatever the situation is. So, cohesion amongst your staff is really important. Dan, I think, is good about, or should be good about, making sure that even if there is disagreement, that it doesn't bubble up, that there's constant communication. And I think that the fact that everyone wants to be here is huge. And I'll just quickly end with this. I was texting with someone over there like a month and a half ago, and basically they were like, these guys are not interested in their next job. They are here to do this job. And not to say that like Anthony Lynn or Cliff or Brian Johnson don't want to take that step up to coordinator or to head coach in the future, but they are focused on, hey, the best way to get the job you want is to do the job you have. That's all you can ask for from people.
That's right. Free agency. Okay, so I thought we go out there, we probably get Brian Burns, we get maybe another high price guy, we get a couple depth players or whatever. That was what I thought they was going to do. Obviously, I was wrong. What was your thought process of how they was going to move in free agency, and how do you feel about how they actually did move?
Yeah, I was pretty confident they would do what they wound up doing, that they would spend money, but it wouldn't be on anything major. And that was both what I was hearing and looking at the market. So like sometimes you hear stuff and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And this was one where it's like, well, what are they going to, like, what big money item are they going to spend on? And I will say Burns is one that super intrigued me. I would have really considered even something similar to what New York ultimately paid for him. But I also understand why they did what they did, because they're not trying to win right now, and keeping flexibility moving forward is a huge priority for them. But the analogy that I've used a ton on our shows is this is like building a house, and in 5 years, we're hoping to have the nicest house on the block. We're hoping to it's decorated with Super Bowl trophies and, NFC Championship game appearances.
Right.
We're the MVP of the league. But right now, you're worried about building the foundation. Like, we don't got to worry about the accoutrements on the wall when we're just trying to lay some concrete. And this is some really good concrete that they've laid. And you might not even remember it, 5 years from now, 3 years from now, whenever it is they start winning, because a lot of these guys probably won't be here. But they are going to establish, like the Zach Ertzes of the world, are going to establish what it means to play under Dan as a Washington Commander, and you need that. And so I think both on who's come in and who they've let walk, that is indicative of kind of that thought process. And that's what I thought they were going to do, and I think they've executed it at a really high level.
The biggest surprise to me was Bobby Wagner.
Same.
Biggest surprise to me. When they did get Louisville, I wasn't like, I believed that he could play Mike. But I just thought that he's just so being able to move him around in this defense would be something that I think Dan Quinn would be looking to do. So I was thinking, a Mike linebacker would be great. And I was just like the day before in spaces and on the pod, look, Bobby Wagner will make too much, like he will make too much sense. That'll be a perfect fit if we could get someone like him, or of course someone in the draft, Jeremiah Trotter, some other guys, but they got Bobby Wagner. I mean, like that was a huge surprise to me.
It was huge to me too. I mean, the day they signed Luvu, Anthony, my producer on the radio show, was like, "You think they can go get B-Wags?" And I was like, "Not anymore." Like, where's he gonna play? Luvu's the Mike, Jamin's the Will, and like they're probably gonna play two linebackers most of the time. And then the next day they signed Bobby Wagner, and I was like, my bad. So I love it. I think this allows flexibility to, like, just like you said, like let Luvu be a weapon. And then let Jamin be a weapon maybe sometimes. Like, I don't know how they're going to do this, which I think is kind of fun. Other than Wagner's going to be the Mike and he's going to have the green dot. But Luvu had the green dot last year in Carolina, and he had like 130 tackles. Like, he was awesome. We had Anish Shroff on the show, who's their play-by-play guy. A lot of listeners and viewers might know him from his days at ESPN. I mean, he's still there at ESPN doing college football, but he's the radio voice of the Panthers. And he's like, Luvu's incredible. Like, he can absolutely play Mike. He's just all over the field. He's the right kind of like impact guy, heart and soul kind of piece. And then to get that and Bobby is crazy. And I just think you talk about the know-how. And the other thing I think too is, like, I feel like John Allen's always been put in a little bit too much of a leadership position. And that's not to say that John isn't a really incredible leader, but John's much more like a lead by example guy. Like, he's not a guy that's going to speak up. He's just going to set an example. I mean, Kerrigan was like that too. Bobby Wagner's not. Bobby Wagner is like, I am the guy in the huddle who is getting everyone together. I am the voice. Like, you are going to hear me all the time. And I think this team needed that, because John was not like that. Terry's not like that. Like, they've lacked that kind of leader. And by the way, I think that's why Chase's voice was outsizedly loud, if outsizedly is a word, the last couple of years, because Chase is like that. Chase will speak up, but I don't know that he was the guy that everybody should have been following. I'll put it that way. And so, like, when you have a loud voice that everyone shouldn't be following, and you have these other voices that you should probably be louder, but are not comfortable speaking up, you get the kind of directionless, rudderless ship that you've had the last couple of years under Rivera. And so with Wagner in here now being like, who's a leader? Bobby Wagner is a leader. I think from both a play, because he had 180 tackles last year, he's still good, and a leadership standpoint, like, A+ signing, great. We'll see what he is still as a player. But I'm just excited that he's in the rooms as a leader on this team.
Yeah, I mean, second team All-Pro. I mean, he's a few months around the same age as when we bring in Fletcher. So
I will warn people about comparing anyone to Fletch, though. Fletch is a mutant. Like, London Fletcher is one of the most like insane physical athletes, physical specimens.
Yes.
Not that Bobby Wagner doesn't take care of his body. Not that Bobby Wagner isn't a pro's pro. But like, London Fletcher, the way he took care of his body and the longevity that he had is uncanny, and I don't want to say unrepeatable, but extremely rarely repeatable. And so I hope that, like, if Bobby Wagner plays 3 more years at a high level, that would be amazing. Be great, Nevertheless, the 5 to whatever that Fletch wound up playing.
Yeah, because he like, his pass coverage has definitely taken a drop over the last couple of years compared to Fletch. I mean, like, you talk about the leadership role and you think about Chase, right? Like, that was Ron's first pick, but was it really Ron's pick? And everyone else is like, yes, coach, yes, coach, yes, coach. Like, all of our roster is full of yes coaches, and no one. So I'm glad Bobby is here. I'm glad these voices is here. I'm glad they're changing the dynamics and the personalities.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you need like player leadership. You need players that are willing, in a healthy way, to challenge.
I mean, you need somebody who'll come to practice late a couple times too, Craig.
I mean, well, as long as you can control him and he's as fast as Deshaun Jackson and can score touchdowns like that, then you tolerate a little bit more. But I think this is an example that a lot of your listeners are probably not aware of. But the last DC team to win a championship, your 2021 Washington Spirit, they had Kelly O'Hara and Emily Sonnet on that team, who are 2 U.S. women's national team players, World Cup winners, veterans. And they just kind of took over by the end of the year. They were like, we are doing it this way because we know what wins. And there was an inexperienced coach. We don't need to get into like the details, but like that ability to challenge a coach and be like, no, like I'm setting the tone here. No one's got a higher standard than me is something that this team has lacked. And we've seen it on all kinds of championship teams throughout all kinds of sports. That's one that pops to mind for me locally and a team that I obviously know very well. But, I think Bobby Wagner is going to not have to do that because he and Dan Quinn are going to be on the same page. But they come from the same place so that if there's a different approach to something, that Bobby can be like, Dan, I think I'm on the same mission with you, but I think we should have a different battle plan. And like that ability to challenge, that ability to speak from experience from the field, and then ultimately to get on the same page with as a leadership group, top players and coaches together and lead the rest of the group, that's how you win in the NFL. And I think that they've probably lacked that kind of personality in the locker room. And I think, wouldn't surprise me if Ertz is that way offensively either. He might be a little less comfortable doing it because, it's just different from the tight end. Like, it's not like he's the quarterback, right? But I do wonder if he's going to come with ideas and, he's kind of almost being told like, hey, dude, we're bringing you here to play tight end and to catch a bunch of footballs. And I know you're here to catch a bunch of footballs because you love playing for Cliff because he gets his guys the ball. But we also want your leadership here. We want you to push us. We want you to challenge us. You've won in this league. Like, we need that. So I think that's going to be interesting.
Remaining hoes. Of course, we signed 20 some people, including our own. But what are some hoes that we still have? I mean, starting caliber hoes.
Yeah, there's this obvious position.
We'll talk about that next.
QB. So QB1 definitely need to fill, and we'll talk about it. So I won't go off on the tangent now. I still would definitely appreciate a new left tackle. I think that if Corn has to be a bridge, even if it's a 6-week bridge for a rookie, like that's fine. If he's your 17-game starter, that's less than ideal. Like you can do a lot worse, but that's not ideal. Zacchaeus was a good signing to get a little depth in the receiver room. Like if he's your 3, okay. I'd still, again, like to upgrade there. Left guard, I think is, I guess with Allegretti there, like you're okay. You let him and Chris Paul battle it out. And it'd be awesome if Chris Paul somehow beat him out because Allegretti is like, it's kind of my Taylor Heineke theory. If someone can beat out Taylor Heineke, they're a real NFL starter. Taylor's like right on the verge of not being one. And so Allegretti's like probably a little better than that. But if you can beat out Allegretti, like you're a solid NFL starter. So that's pretty much it on offense. I would like if you can, there's just not the tight ends in this draft class to get better than Zach Ertz. You can add depth to that room. But I think Ertz is going to wind up being your tight end 1, and then Bates is kind of your blocker guy. Okay. And then defensively, corner is the big question, right? Yes. And so they've signed now a bunch of different dudes who have started a bunch of games opposite Emmanuel Forbes. That's great. You've got options there. I don't know that any of them are awesome. All of a sudden, if someone pops for you in the second round, like someone falls and you're like, cool. If Kool-Aid McKinstry's all of a sudden there at 36, you have the flexibility to take a guy like that. And that would ultimately be your starter. I think the other questions are like, what do they think of BSJ? Obviously, super talented, lacks the big thing that they love in ball skills. So can they coach that up and all of a sudden he's a stud? Or is he more of the guy that he was last year? And then what is Quan? Is Quan your nickel? Or are you looking at like the kid out of Michigan, Sanderstill, I think is his name, at 36 and 40, because he could start from day one as your nickel, and then Quan's like another safety hybrid move piece along with Chin and then Defoe on the back end. So I think those are the big ones. I mean, obviously, I would love to get a blue chip pass rusher in the draft if you can figure that out. But I think that you have starting caliber players there, knowing that your studs are your tackles. I think corner is obvious. I think quarterback is obvious. I think left tackle is obvious. And I'm pretty comfortable, even if I'm not thrilled with every other position, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sounds good to me. And hopefully, like Quan, he was one of the only players. And now, like you say, the kid from Michigan that's actually played nickel, played in the slot for more than 2 years in college. So hopefully, like, unlike Quan, they won't draft him and put him at safety, right? And have him do all this other stuff that he has.
No, that kid's a nickel. The problem, like the problem with Quan is he could be good at all of them.
Yeah.
The problem is he can only play one at once. So pick one.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? Yeah, position flex. All right. Quarterback. Now, you know how I love you guys, you and Logan. So, I was
Here we
not
go.
high on JJ. I call them good
Mhm.
times. And everyone in Spaces know that all my listeners know how I love you guys. And they send me clips. Hey, look, Craig says this. Logan is saying this now. I'm like, oh, because usually that's how they shut me up. Well, Craig and Logan said this. I'm like, well, all right. Because I take y'all stuff for gospel, right? So talk to me about JJ.
I think that most people who don't like JJ McCarthy don't like what they think JJ McCarthy is versus what JJ McCarthy actually is.
Okay.
JJ McCarthy actually is a guy who's got a pretty decent ceiling and no major red flags. His big major red flag is inexperience. Well, that's pretty solvable. You get him experience and you just have him play more. And then the other silly criticism in my book is, well, why didn't they lean on him more? Well, the point of football, Deuce, as you well know, is to win. And
Right.
remind me what Michigan did last year.
They won a lot.
They
Yeah.
won a lot and they won the Natty. So if you had a better game plan to lean on JJ McCarthy for funsies, that was going to somehow get you 2 national championships in 1 year instead of 1, I'm sure Harbaugh would have loved to hear from you. So they played within what was best for their team, balancing out their incredible defense, using Blake Corum, who's very good. But it's not like JJ couldn't have done more. And so if you look at the throws that he actually has, and there's not a high volume, I totally get that, which makes people nervous. You look at what he actually did. It's a lot of NFL throws. It's a lot of key situations. And because they leaned on that running game, if it went sideways, all of a sudden it's 3rd and 9, and JJ's got a ball. And he balled time and time and time again. And then I think the other thing that people think he can't do is make plays. No. That dude gets out of the pocket. He can run. There's a throw he makes. I keep saying it's against the red team. I finally went and looked it up. I'm pretty sure it was Nebraska. I finally went back and rewatched the highlight.
Where he is, when
they have the ball on the 20-yard line. So they're just outside the red zone. And he gets pressure, has to roll to his left. He's a right-handed quarterback. So he's rolling to his left, and he gets right back to the line of scrimmage, and he laces a ball running left across his body on a frozen rope to the back inch of the end zone. So it's 30 yards in the air on a rope. That's a big-time throw. That is as good as it gets. You can't quarterback better than that in terms of making a play off schedule. And I think it's Roman Wilson who he just dots in the back of the end zone. And so he has stuff like that all over tape. There's one ball he threw, a seam ball. I can't remember. It might have also been the Nebraska game where he throws it behind a DB's helmet. He understands the DB's going to have to turn. And as the DB turns, he's turning this way and the ball comes behind his head that way. That is just next level type of stuff. He can handle a lot mentally because, he played for Harbaugh. I was talking to my pal Noah Eagle, who does the Big Ten for NBC, and he said he's the most elite mental college athlete he's ever talked to. And so I just look at that, and then I compare it to the red flags of the other guys, and I'm like, what's the red flag here? JJ, his deep ball isn't great. I'll give you that. It's not A+, but he does give his guys chances, and his guys came through for him a lot. What does that look like at the NFL level? That's something I'm concerned about. But his pocket presence, his arm, his mobility, his running ability, all that kind of stuff, it's already pretty high level. And he's, by the way, not going to turn 22 years old until after the season next year.
Yeah.
So there's just, to me, there's a lot to like. There's not a lot to like, or there's not a lot to like. And then we can talk about May and Daniels, and there's a ton to like with both of those guys too. To be very clear, I am very happy with any 3 of those. I can justify any of them.
I call that the fence. And Twitter, the Commanders fans are going crazy. I am on the fence. It doesn't matter to me. That's my position.
But I can point out way bigger red flags for Jaden and Drake than I can with JJ.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So at 2, do you think JJ at 2 is a real possibility? Because the past couple days, for some reason, do not trade back. Get the quarterback at 2. Get the quarterback at 2. But just thinking about how Adam Peters and these guys have been moving, and the different comments about this and that they've been saying, the hints, kind of putting everything together. My trade meter has been kind of rising a little bit in the last couple of days, to be honest.
If you tell me that you're guaranteeing me that I can get one of those three, so probably having to trade back up to 4, or you do your homework, you know that Arizona's taken Marvin Harrison and you can go to 5. I'm fine with trading back. As I said, I'm happy with any of the 3. And if you're telling me I get one of those 3 plus another first rounder this year, let's say it's the Minnesota deal or a future first, like I think that probably is better value than any one of them on their own. But if you look at JJ and you're like, that's the guy, like those red flags for Drake and Jaden are no-goes for Adam Peters. And I'm not saying that by no means do I have any information on that, because to be very clear, for anybody that is consuming any information, nobody knows what Adam Peters is thinking. He is very close to the vest. And so if JJ's your guy, don't mess around. Just take him at 2. And I think that is a perfectly justifiable pick. I realize that is an unpopular but growing in popularity opinion. I know my guy Mark Bullock agrees with me on that. Logan is with me on that.
He just came over yesterday. I said, Mark, the day is April 1st, and I'm not going to believe you until tomorrow.
It was funny because I was talking about, I don't know whether Mark was listening to the show or not, or he just happened to DM me at the same time. Sorry for spilling our DMs, Mark. But he and I have been talking about JJ quite a bit. And he DM'd me right as I was on the air in a commercial break, going back and forth with Chris Russell, who's guesting on the start of my show yesterday. So we were talking about it on the air. I was talking about it with Mark in the DMs. But like, if JJ's your guy, if you think he's the best one of the 3, just take him at 2.
Yeah.
Move on. Continue to build your team. And I think you're going to be very, very happy with your pick.
Yeah. Woo! These next few weeks is going to be something, boy. I'm excited. All right, before we get out of here, what are you outside looking in? What do you think the and everything that we've heard, they've said over the past couple months, what do you think the 3-year plan is for this team?
I think the 3-year plan would be continuing to smartly add good vets in free agency while hoping that your draft picks pop into blue chip level talent. And that's what build through the draft really means. Like, they have a ton of money still this year. Nevertheless, in the future, they have the flexibility to make a big trade. So maybe if they feel like they're close, let's say this quarterback pick, whether it's Jaden, Drake, or JJ, works out and quicker than they imagine, could they go spin kind of a luxury type of trade, get a wide receiver or a great tight end or someone like that, and spend big money on it and give up some draft capital? Yeah, they could, and try to compete sooner rather than later on kind of the rookie contract timeline. But I think ultimately it's, if you look at the rookie contract, it's 4 years plus the 5th-year option. Can they be competing for a championship by year 3? I think that's the goal, to have built up the team enough around a quarterback, a la what they did in San Francisco, where if they get the quarterback right, it doesn't have to be a superstar. It can be like the perfect fit, a la Purdy. Then you're in business competing years 3 through 5 of a rookie deal. And then hopefully you've done well enough in the draft that when you sign the quarterback to the big money extension, you have enough flexibility, as Allen and McLaurin will be coming off the books and, everything else to continue to build around that in a smart way. And if your quarterback turns out to be a stud, you can kind of go the Mahomes route and be like, all right, we can skimp here and skimp there, make sure the defense is really solid, and then compete on a longer term basis. So I think that's the 3-year plan ultimately, is like, can you be competing for championships by year 3?
Thank you so much, Craig. We definitely appreciate you joining again. You giving us your time. It's always a pleasure having you on, buddy.
Always great to be with you, Deuce. Let's do it again soon.
Yep. Are you going to be at camp at all any of this week?
I don't know if I'll be heading out to Ashburn this week, but definitely we'll be out there throughout the off season. And then obviously in August, I'll be out there quite a bit when training camp rolls around. Who knows? Maybe they'll have 2 sets of bleachers this year.
Maybe. We'll see, right?
Yeah.
All right. Everything Craig Hoffman is going to be in the description of the podcast when it airs today at 5 o'clock. Craig, definitely thank you again, buddy.
Appreciate it, Deuce.
All right. Peace.